So, Bo, what time of day is it for you today?
Well, it's 7 o'clock here in Helsinki.
It's 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, Canada.
hmm Autumn is starting to make itself felt gradually here.
Yeah, it's actually been consistently warmer. We've had very little rain this year, but yeah, it's
hmm
starting to chill off.
Yeah, we have had a lot of rain this summer for sure, and very warm.
Mm.
Do you expect a big crowd here? I just wanted to pop in to see what's going on.
Not really expecting. I'm basically doing some updates on data related stuff for the hospitality and travel
hmm
work coming out of DIF. There's a working group that's working on a profile, but it's also exploring a lot of agent-related issues
hmm
because the expectation is both the creation and use of profiles of both traveler and services are going to be, there's going to be a large component of agent
hmm
activity in there. So exploring some of the issues in working through developing the profile. Um, we're tripping across how do you package the information, um, and
Yeah,
also how does it get used by both parties,
yeah,
um, and what is the
pretty much.
overall work out?
Pretty much about semantics and things like that. I'm very excited to see that in the We Build project that now has started in EU and has a very aggressive timetable for the EU business wallets, organization wallets. The working group that is looking into semantics is led by a guy I have very high regard for who works for the Finnish tax. Obviously, when you get the wallets in use, it is high time to dive deeper and see what we can do to get the semantics in place for the data that is being exchanged.
Yeah, well, I would say certainly semantics are key. Part of it is there's a lot of semantics that come out of the travel industry that may be foreign to travelers. So part of
hmm
it is to bridge that to make sure that um, what may be, I mean, a lot of personalized information that goes in a
hmm
profile is going to be generated by your actual travel, right? So
Sure
your
enough, yes,
experience.
that's a field. That's a field which WeBuild is going to certainly look into very much because the business wallets obviously are needed as the interfaces in so many places, and I'm sure that they can draw on your experience as well and your points there. So this is really hotting up here. The EU Commission has promised that they are very good at regulating things, but now they have promised to do as little as possible and as soon as possible, meaning before Christmas they should be ready with it, and then we can start employing the business wallets that you need also for AI agents uh, soon, and there are only 25 available from the market, so we don't need to create anything. We just take them into use.
Oh, to me, the whole concept of agents and a wallet's platform. The
Sure enough.
wallet in itself doesn't actually have any intelligence about a specific topic.
No, of
So,
course not.
one of the things that and so sessions I've been holding recently have been talking about what sort of things are we tripping across in looking at a very
Mm-hmm.
in-depth travel profile. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so one of the, we're looking at things like medical records
Mm-hmm.
uh, as not so much what you're going to disclose, but you need the medical records in order to assess what supports does someone need when they're traveling,
Mm-hmm.
what supports they need out of a hotel, what supports in boarding an airplane, supports
Exactly.
in terms of altitude, you know uh, if you want to go, oh, you want to go on a hiking trip. Okay, well, one of the things you may need to pop out of
Mhm.
that from a travel service, and I certainly have seen this, is that they
Mhm.
say, okay, do you have any known issues with cold or
Mhm.
altitudes? And if the answer is I
Mhm.
don't know, it's like, well, before you climb the Matterhorn, you might want to find out whether you have some issues. Um,
Yeah. And
Certainly,
should this be in the form of credentials then, just so that they can be verifiable in case it's an insurance issue or something like that, and you have maybe
well,
misled somebody
well,
with wrong
let's
information?
let's put it this way. What I would expect is let's call it a singleton issuer.
Mm-hmm.
So I would expect to go for, I want to go scuba diving. Scuba diving is, famous for saying, okay, um,
Mm-hmm.
one of the main criterias is you have to be fit. So
Yeah.
in some cases, I've seen some discussions talking about scuba divers, service providers saying, okay, we want to get a signed copy from a fitness agent, local
Exactly.
fitness agent to you. Um,
Yeah.
Not so dissimilar from the case of someone I know is became a quadriplegic about 4 or 5 years ago, taking their first flight on a plane.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that required a doctor's note signed
Mm-hmm.
saying, here's what my patient can cope with, here's what supports
Mm-hmm.
they need
Yeah.
for the airline to say, yeah, which is uh, known as right now, that's largely a paper document called a fitness for travel in the travel industry.
Sure. Sure.
And it's a piece of paper that you hand to somebody, and it's got all sorts of use cases or conditions they want to know about.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a form of that. And right now that takes a considerable amount of time to do. It took about 2.5 months to get all the
Mm-hmm.
details in place to book a single trip. Um,
Yeah.
so part of this would be to have that stuff on file. So it would be let's call it an a signed expert
Mm.
attestation as opposed to an
Mm.
issued credential.
Exactly. It can be in the form of a credential when it arrives to your wallet, and you can then show it when you need it. I have an example here which I've been pretty enthusiastic about for when people apply for jobs, for example, in restaurants, and there's 1 million restaurants and cafes in Europe. And in many countries, you must have a hygiene passport, which is issued by public sector actors usually. And that's pretty similar to what you're talking about here now. And that's the volumes. I mean, there must be some 15 million people working in these places in Europe only.
Mm.
And to get this kind of credential to your wallet is obviously something that you put together with the identification credential when you send your job application. So it's actually a human right. I just wrote on LinkedIn also that it's a human right for anybody to be able to get all the data you need for your job application, including the hygiene passport and your identification credential, and a few other things depending on the job, from all sorts of sources, from public sector and private as well. And when you talk about the scuba diving case, I mean, that is quite similar when it comes to, of course, the issuer. If it's a state that issues the credential for identification, it's stronger than if it's a freelance doctor or whatever. But it is up to the receiver of the credential to decide if he trusts it or not.
Well, to me, that's the old trust chain, right?
Sure
So if
enough.
the doctor can say, I can show you my certificate as a certified doctor, then that
Mm-hmm.
information, that's how we've been tackling those attraction pass
Yeah.
uh, use case that we looked at last year, or maybe the year before, where the question is, okay, you want to sell me a ticket to an event, but you're not the
Mm-hmm.
official seller. So how do I know you can validly sell me that ticket? And so in that
Mm.
case, the answer was that needs to go back. You need to, if you want to sell me the ticket, you can earmark it for me, but you got to go back to the original issuer of the ticket and have them reissue it to me as opposed to my having to
Mm-hmm.
trust you, right? There was the only way to absolutely
Yeah.
guarantee the audit trail of authority. So there's certain things like that, and one of the things that
Well, this is no
sorry,
news.
yeah.
This is no.
So So one of the things I tripped across today is one of the things I'm in the middle of doing some implementation on is uh, uh, travel profile information around food. And there's three different subsections to that. One is what diet are you on, which can be as as formal as a kosher or halal diet. And there's certain, I won't get into the details of that, but diet is more about what you can't eat and when you're allowed to eat. To give it a, you've also got cuisines. What style of cooking do I want? And that can get fairly deep. And then you've got another aspect, which is let's call it a catalog of foods, drinks, and ingredients, and which ones I like and don't like, including categories. So it's a graph. It's a category. Let's call it a hierarchical graph from going from top level, proteins to meats to beef to whatever. What's the word I'm looking for here? In terms of, is it fruits? Is it produce? Et cetera, et cetera. But there's other issues which come into play here. In terms of going out to a restaurant. So one of the things one of the principles we're looking at is there's a traveler profile. It says here is my preferences, here is my requirements, here's what I can't eat, here's my allergies. And on the other side, there's a restaurant or any travel food service saying here are our kitchen provisions. So in some cases, like for halal or a kosher or other diets, you have to have certain certifications. So, what kitchen provisions do you have in terms of avoiding allergies? Do you have? I know there's certainly some. I think it may be peanuts, but I know there's at least a few.
Peanuts is very dangerous. Yes. On that note, just quickly, what springs to my mind there is that the question you get when you go to a restaurant or book a table, at least here in Finland, is always, do you have allergies? And to me, I would like to, when I book this online, to save their time and my time, I would like to include, in addition to my name, which they may want to verify in some cases, or my age, if we talk about alcohols and so forth, without my name, the allergies, so that it's automatically told. I don't need to worry about it, and they don't need to worry about it. It's just a part of my identity, like my name and my grades from university and whatnot. So we should actually try to get it as a part of that. When we come then to food I like or not like, that's then another question that I may express when I'm there.
Yeah, so thinking about that, like what we're finding is allergies can be a really extensive list. And part of the problems with looking at foods is I've got things I like, there's things I dislike, and things that are prohibited for diet reasons. Like I'm not halal, certainly kosher is the best example. I am allowed to eat meats, but pork is prohibited, not from a medical reason. And that other approved meats need to be, they're conditionally permitted if your kitchen has the right qualifications. So it's the shall we say, food source to restaurant path. How did the food get from farm to the restaurant? It's how does the restaurant store it and manage it? Do they have separate kitchens for, say, halal or non-halal? So there's a bunch of things that come into factor there. The one thing that in going through this is there's an insanely huge amount of information in our personal profile. It just it's exploded in terms of, and it's sometimes you can't tell how much you need until you look at the problem space, but it's huge.
So it is. But I think that that I pick up this allergies thing and try to press it through here so that that we could get that as a part of your booking information that is coming automatically, because that's rather serious stuff. It can be really dangerous
Well,
if you don't say. But then you have to know your allergies, of course, but you don't need to have a doctor statement for it. That would be that's not necessary. You don't have to. The restaurant doesn't have to go and verify if it's true or not with the doctor.
yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. It would probably be to, especially since allergies seem to be increasing on a per capita basis, is readily available allergy tests. I mean, as a child, in my about the age of 10, I went in and had an extensive allergy test done because I was just sneezing and whatever else, and it was like, okay, let's find out what the problem is. And I was, they do little pinpricks down your arm of things that you're allergic to. And they said anywhere it's a little red, you're allergic to it. Well, I looked like a neon sign.
Yeah.
So one of the questions is, in terms of this as a general thing, is from an agent perspective, is who is providing the information and who is providing the assessment. So
yeah,
the model we've been working on unconsciously is that I'm going to make a meal request. I'm in Helsinki. The model was, you're going to hand out your profile, you're going to hand out your allergies, and restaurants are going to respond saying, hey, we've got exactly what you want. And we've looked at our menu list and the ingredients, and these things are here are all the meals with your allergies filtered out. And here are the meals that, based on your preferences, we think that, here are the top 3 meals based on what your preferences or preferred cuisines or whatever else is. The problem with that is you're handing it breaks the selective disclosure question. For you to really understand all my preferences, either I need to, as somebody who's going out to dine, I need to know a lot about what you offer in order for me to give you the minimum set of information you need. Or I need you to give me your profile and your menu with all the ingredients, and I will assess that based on what I know my allergies are and my preferences to say, so part of this is who's doing because the working assumption we've had so far is we're start with the travel profile, and somewhere down the road, we're going to bring in the service profile. So the restaurant profile, the wine profile, the hotel profile. And it looks more and more like much of what you have in your personal profile, or what you would have in your profile about, say, a hotel or a restaurant and foods, is going to echo the kind of profile you're going to have on the other side. In other words, I'm going to talk about what kinds of hotel rooms, what floor, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you're going to tell me as a hotel that what rooms you have available in concept and which ones are actually available for the time window I want to go after. So that could flip in either direction. The big difference is hotels are not disclosing personal information. Neither are restaurants. So that's publicly available information. But just about everything you're disclosing is personal and possibly personally identifying. So it's a question in my mind, and especially certainly I would say the last 18 months, the concept of anonymous agents working on your behalf has morphed into, there will be agents that act for services, and there are going to be dedicated agents that they report to you. You control them. That can do that. Can do the heavy lifting, because one of the things that the travel profile is predicated on is it does not exchange the raw stored data. It will extract that and present, a question that will come across, and then you present back to the other party the subset of information that they actually asked for and that you're willing to exchange with them, right? So it's in a form of JSON, but it doesn't worry about how words get translated. You're talking to a German restaurant, and they may have to have certain things in your profile translated for them to understand, and or vice versa.
Yeah.
So there's which is very different from, so in fact the model we have is there's a storage schema.
Yeah.
There's a, let's call it staging profile, the one that's in memory that a query is actually going to be run against, and then there's the presentation profile, which is a result of the questions.
Yeah. Well, to me, it sounds like it could be a good idea to keep apart the, let's say, verifiable credentials and then your preferences, which do not need to be verified. You just present them in an automated way. And I mean, I think about the allergies, they don't need to be verifiable. The blood group may need to be verifiable, that you get actually verifiable credential about your blood group so that there is no mistake. If you decide to donate your body parts before you go on scuba diving, then that's also, I mean, your choice to express, of course, that you have in a register, at least here in this country. But I don't think it needs to be verified by anybody. But of course, we are then in situations that you should be able to hand over these kind of credentials or preferences, even if you are offline. So all of this, both the verifiable ones and the preference group ones, should be available also offline.
Well, there's two things we'll hit on there. To the last point, my working assumption that I seem to have convinced people of is you're going to have a distributed wallet. So you're going to have the same information synchronized on your laptop, on your phone, on your tablet, and especially a cloud wallet.
Yeah.
So you're going to have something that in the event that you're offline, that information is reachable. And if you have an agreement for access to data, you would also have a version of your agent that sits on all those things. They were also going to have permissions defined in advance so that they can't disclose information in the absence. So case in point, I'm traveling on a plane. The Wi-Fi goes out on the plane, but offline that I can't see, my next flight has been canceled or it's been delayed. In which case it requires change to my itinerary. In which case I can say, okay, I'm in flight, so there's all the work up until the date you get on the plane to the time you arrive. So in flight, literally, you're in a mode saying you have the right to renegotiate with the following preferences and criteria. My personal agent is delegated to assist in rebooking me on another flight. It's just that the more I look at that, the more it's, there's already a huge amount of information out there for hotels and airline bookings ad nauseum, because they essentially, that's what they're using now. It's a bit of a industry specific mess. And some of it's quite archaic, but they at least have that information so that they're giving APIs into third parties to go through a booking.com or somebody else to actually do stuff. So the interfaces are there for you to publicly access. So the question becomes, where does the smarts sit that works on your behalf? And like I said, the last 24 hours, I sort of done a flip saying, I'm going to make a request to you. I may have some specifics I'm looking for, saying, hey, I'm looking for the following service. And rather than a service come back and ask me all sorts of questions, you say, okay, and I want the following information. I want your menus or your flights are available, whatever's. So more of a conversation where the information doesn't leave the, let's call it, your own personal sandbox. So I don't, I ask for the information. I look through determination, say, I'm going to, in other words, the personal agent becomes the thing asking most of the questions, but that it can't ask those questions unless the service profile is there from the other agents. So that was sort of something that just struck me as a lot of problems just disappear from data privacy if the public services can exchange, or they're free to exchange it. There's no privacy issue there, as far as I'm aware. A lot of those privacy problems just disappear. Because one of the things that's sort of like coincidental with that is looking at medical records versus the supports you need. So you need to have medical records so that either person or your own agent or, medical professional can say, okay, you have the following issues, which we know you're going to need special supports if you're going on a plane, train, automobile, a cruise, staying in a certain hotel, going to a certain elevation, et cetera, et cetera. So the point there is that you need to have that information in your profile, number one. And number two, you don't need to disclose that. You can evaluate that through your own agent as opposed to handing it out for something else to do so.
Sure, sure.
And
maybe
in
you
fact,
can also, of course, ask your personal AI agent, which you have taken into use with the help of your ID wallet. That's the only way, if you ask me, to make you to work on your behalf to get that better organized.
oh
Now
yeah,
I'm extremely sorry, but they are trying to get me into another meeting which I had forgotten about here.
that's okay.
So I have to log off.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining, Bo. Always helps to have some discussions with the Finns. You guys have a lot of good stuff going in on SSI
Okay.
and all that stuff.
See you around. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. So, that's I was only really planning about 30 minutes today because I got to get these schemas actually worked out.
Yeah, I think actually it's great, Neil, because I wanted to catch up with you on a different topic, related to the hospitality and travel. So the way the Hat Pro schema, is going to be distributed. I know that there was some discussion between you and Kim in terms of the procedure to get that done. Because our process maps and procedures are reliant on this. So is there any update on this front?
You mean Kim as in Kim Duffy?
Yes. So that's what at least Douglas told me last time, that you're trying to figure out a way to how we're going to distribute the schema in terms of like the recommended guidance, or are we going to publish it somewhere, or how will that effort look like?
Well, at this point, we've got a pretty comprehensive document on the concepts, which is the guide that was finished, I guess, about 4 or 5 months ago. What I'm working on at this point is a combination of building the schema and also building the distribution structure in GitHub. So all the materials will be, or in terms of the actual JSON schema, the plant UML models, meaning the what's called the class diagrams. The intention and what I have partially working, and I need to just spend more time with to get it fully automated, is to model this as class diagrams or a set of related class diagrams so you can walk through it and see the big picture, have that generate JSON schema, and then have it generate a sample profile. In other words, fill in the blanks for a fictitious traveler. So a worked example will be available along with all of those components so that someone can see exactly what it looks like. But it's turning out to be a much bigger job than anybody had guessed, because there's a huge amount of information required in there. And the structure variations are non-trivial. So it's proving a tougher job than I was hoping. But it's proceeding. The basic concepts are fine. It's more about working the details out and getting the generation of JSON schema. So, for example, the technology being used is a text-based modeling language called Plant UML. It's an open standard, and it can generate JSON schema, but you have to have the right hints put in as notes or comments in the Plant UML to generate the JSON schema you're expecting to come out of that. In other words, let's call it JSON schema and JSON effective hints, and build standard models for, okay, so how do we handle enum lists? Well, enum list should be a JSON file of values, and it should have, if it's required, a qualification specification in the JSON or a JSON schema for it as to what are valid values, such as what are the valid languages combinations, language locale variations, for what are the standards for let's call it internal or technical strings. In other words, the working string that an application is going to work on, as opposed to the structure for translatable strings, such as I have an enum list that has names of cities or whatever else, and have them translated depending on the language that the person that's being presented to wants to see. So there's a lot of concepts like that that need to be worked through and also get baked into the models. So, but the specifications around what information is going in, I think those are all fairly well established. It's more a question of, give you a case in point, an example I'm working through, what I've been talking with Doug Rice about, is what if I have a diet, right? So what, you take some diets, and how should information about what are prohibited foods for a given diet apply to the overall list of food, drink, and ingredients preferences? And there's a couple of different ways to do it, with some trade-offs, because you could have what's prohibited because of a diet. You could have entries that say, for this food, under the following diets, it's prohibited, right? But that tends to get a little crowded. And in some cases, you may have quite different food lists, food, drink, and ingredient lists for diet A versus diet B. So certain diets may have, like if you're a vegan, you're not going to, you may have a place in your, let's call it your graph for meats, but you may say meats in general are prohibited, and I'm not going to provide any more detail for any meats whatsoever in my profile, because I don't eat animal products. All right. So there's various constructs like that need to be figured out and put in place. And what about the exception? Doug came up with a delightful example. I want to define my own version of a vegetarian diet where, and this model's a little old, but assuming eggs fits under the category of dairy, so milk, cheese, whatever, and eggs are part of dairy in the sense of it being something produced on a farm. I want to say no dairy except eggs. So for the whole category, I want to have prohibited dairy, but I want to still have in my profile is this entry called eggs, and it says it may be the only sub entry under dairy. And it says yes, this is permitted. So how do you do that? And it gets a little complicated, because if I say a whole field of meat is prohibited, and I don't provide, do I like or dislike, or I don't go through the entire list saying every kind of meat that's possible is prohibited. I just say, no, I set up at the top prohibited, and you should know that if there's no structure underneath, it means any kind of meat. So now you've got a tie-in says, for a restaurant, it can look at that, and it has to have a common understanding of what falls under meat in terms of things that you can't have. So
yeah, even I think it's a very tricky, there are many tricky scenarios as such as you just mentioned, and I think traditionally the industry was not able to address all of this. So it's either you would have a vegetarian diet ahead of flight. They will tell you, for example, like what are your preferences. So quite a a straightforward checklist, and at the end of the day, they're not going to offer you something like very unique or special, but it's more about like 2 or 3 choices, for instance. Unless like it's a first-class cabin where you can have some a bit of I would say customization, but also it won't get you to all that you want. So what we're trying to build is basically something that is going to address or help address all of those scenarios, which is quite tricky, as you said. But I think, in terms of the logistics, as in the foundation getting this work outside. So are we going to use the ordinary channels like the GitHub and, for publishing the working examples, or is there, or are we going to leverage our current site?
Well, it's both. So far, the way we've been proceeding with it is we'll put, specific information organized for, let's say, non-technical people. We've already put a bunch of things on the website. The other things, including, the Word documents, etc., we've put them in as we put the PDF. We put like the Microsoft Word doc and also the PDFs. So, the basic, the overall top level guide is in GitHub, and it's referenced on the website. So, the intent is anything that's a version controllable document, in other words, something that changes over time, should go on GitHub. And that includes the JSON schema, any support documentation that goes along with that. That's the intent, because you can have the purely technical stuff, and then you can add a README or a README file that's a Word document, saying for more details, here's an overview of the schema. Right, so you can put all that material in there and refer to it from the website. So the website gives you more flexibility in that you don't have to be a GitHub expert. You can reorganize information that, like the organization of information in terms of strict, .pmul files and .json schema files and JSON. That's, the structure you have in there is something that's pretty much geared up to different projects, meaning the people working on this stuff in future, so that they have, things isolated in their own little, in the section they're working on, so that it's not tripping over other teams where there's overlap. So the structure that goes in GitHub is going to be specifically oriented towards people working literally hands-on in the schema or implementation using the schema. The rest of the information we can package up on the website and or add supplemental overview. I fully expect to have at least 2 or 3 documents to explain the overall structure and why it's broken up that way. And in terms of strategies, like I said, strategy says all enums go to a JSON file as opposed to embedded, right? So you're going to have to read a file to know the enum list. So that's the other one is translation. Translations will be done at the storage and staging layer, where you're going to take, a technical internal value, which is, for the better description, something in ENUS encoding. And you're going to do a lookup from tables, one for each language, that will give you what the translation value is, as opposed to trying to do it actively, right? So those are some of the basic principles that need to be explained, because they're pretty fundamental to making it work. So there's some of the details of those have not been worked out, but I know they work in principle because there's other projects out there that are doing that. So in other words, the view of information on this will be from, the working coders, anybody working at the deep technical level, versus consumers, be they someone that said, how do I use this? If I've got a travel profile that's been constructed, how do I find out the possible values, for example? So one of the key deliverables for, let's say, the food, drink, and cuisine and diet is a catalog, a component catalog for, show me all the, you're gonna, at a top level, you will have, and I got to work the details of this out, but, I've got cuisines. So what are my top levels? And then you can snap in components under that for what are the subcategories and subcategories. So each one of those, you can pick that up and snap it in. It gives people a catalog. What are the possible values, right? What are the possible subtypes of foods and categories of foods and food items like salt and potassium chloride is an ingredient. So clearly those have to be predefined as a catalog of parts as opposed to one big honking pre-done, which was the original thought, but that doesn't scale very well. It's easier to break that down into components by category, subcategory, and do it that way. So some of this is being geared up towards the size of the amount of data and the complexity of the organization of it and the need for extendability. So those are all topics that need to be talked about, right? Here's how we've designed. You want to come up with a new food group, you want to come up with a new cuisine, you want to come up with a new type of diet. Here's your guideline in terms of creating, your own diet, right? And there's some wrinkles in there because there's a trade-off. Does each diet have its own food, drink, ingredient structure? Or is there one food, drink, ingredient structure, and you have metadata in there that flags exceptions for a given purpose? So, that's where some of the uncertainties lie at this point.
Yeah, so I think, to your point, like a non-technical folk would want to know, like, what kind of, as you said, like at least some of those predefined parameters or values that they would go through and choose, or look at least in terms of what options they have as basic functions. Then, all of the other, I would say, complexities in terms of the coding and how this is made, the plant UML, the JSON schema, and others will be part of the technical audience documentation in the website.
One of the key challenges at this point is for some, and Doug's talked about this a lot, is, okay, we need somebody who's a scuba diver and skiing experts. So part of the question there is, okay, what logically does the kind of information you need in your personal profile about scuba diving, right? And it's a combination of self-attested information that you would cryptographically sign as a scuba diver. And there will be credentials, like, do you have, and I think scuba is a very good example because we're going back many, many years. I remember going, and I'd never taken, I'm a strong swimmer, but I went down to the Caribbean at Club Med, and I got to do some incredibly ambitious scuba diving. And what you did is you took a local course while you were on vacation. Took you, 3 or 4 days. And then they would say, okay, we're happy, you know what you're doing. You're a strong swimmer, you know how to do the emergency protocols. Now you need something like NAEU or PADI, for 2 of the North American standards. You need to have a certificate, and they have different grades of certificates. So, basically it's certification for how deep can you safely dive? Like, what are you trained to what depth? What conditions? So is it, you trained for cold water? Are you trained for, clarity of water? In other words, night dives, whatever else. There's different categorizations in there. So that's certainly a certificate you would have to have that's associated with that. But you'd also need to perhaps have, what's my experience? Where have I dived? What have I done? And as I said, supplemental certificates like a fitness certificate, a current fitness certificate. Or even a medical record saying the class of one I've seen for scuba diving, probably more than that right now, is show me a note from a doctor that you have not had an ear infection in the last 2 months, right? Because that's definitely ear problems are a massive issue, particularly with regards to damage. Once you start going much below about 10 meters. So there's that kind of information that is very specific to that topic. So what we're looking to do is get scuba experts to saying, what is all that package of information logically, and we'll help you package it up and put that into the profile. So that's one of the target audiences we're looking to is give them a mechanism to provide input saying, here's what we need from you. So that's obviously going to need a write-up in terms of what that looks like. Probably a lot of Zoom calls, I would think, to get that squared away. But we haven't really we haven't really identified anybody like that yet.
Yeah, actually, no. Also, I've been struggling, attending the last calls, having a lot of things moving in parallel. That's why. But I think, in terms of addressing all of those topics, it's a real need, I would say. And like maybe there's also some work to be done on our side in terms of getting more people involved with us in this work. So I think maybe outreach and marketing and stuff like that.
Well, certainly, I mean, that's what Doug and Bill and Alex have been looking at from, promoting and Alexing. So there's a long list of that. I think where we're weakest at this point is we've got some really good candidates we'd like to have involved to do the work I'm doing, but unfortunately, they're doing too well in their businesses. So I got a conversation tomorrow morning and another one on Friday. So this Friday's session will be Kabir Maga talking about the simplified personal profile he's created for his company, which is predominantly looking at security access. In other words, digital cards with digital identity for access to buildings. He's doing quite a bit of work with I think of the far in the Middle East and other places. So he's just doing too well financially to spend the time. But that's certainly, just the volume of work I'm finding is it's really huge. And for this to, be fully commercializable, it's going to need a team of, 5 or 6 senior people. This is not something that is sustainable as a one person effort on the technical side. So, but I know that, it's a chicken and egg, right? First, you got to get something that's good enough to attract people, and then you use that to leverage and get more people involved and attract some money to actually start paying us all. So.
Yeah, I think, like also in terms of what the DIF can do, because, I think they have great capabilities in terms of at least the audience who are subscribed to DIF at this stage. So I think, us at least getting some of that support in terms of, the outreach through the channels of the DIF will make a big difference. So even if, let's say, we're getting a low traction, but at least, getting some of those announcements published through the page on LinkedIn or other channels will help us, move the needle forward.
Well, certainly I know that, there is, I know Kim Duffy is certainly writing up, she puts out postings and blog posts and stuff to talk about the work that's being done. What I would observe is that, and you and I just got off that call for the trusted AI agents stuff at DIF, right? With courtesy of Andor. And those guys are not talking about the personal profiles. That they're all about protocols and identity and credentials. So it's not something that community, until the demand is there, that, okay, the way the world is going is in terms of interactions, your personal profile, I suspect the reality is that agents are going to really emphasize that. Because if the whole point of the selling point to John and Mary Public, why should I use an agent? It's because once they have, they can work with you to build your profile so that you can understand for yourself what your needs are. And in some cases, let's say I'm going on a cruise for the first time in my life, and I happen to have mobility or other medical issues, then an AI agent having experience and with, a broader range of people could reach out and say, okay, what we have, what you need to know about the services you're going to need when you travel. Here's some travel that based on what we've got from your medical records, we can look at the kinds of travel and hospitality, hotels and accommodation that you want to do. And say you need to, if you don't know, you need to find out the following about your abilities and lack of abilities. and understand what you're going to need to ask for when you travel, in terms of what what are your limitations and what assistance you need to ask for. And in the case of, as I said, there's a case with a gentleman named John Jordan, who was one of the people who created Trust over IP in the first place. He had a very nasty accident. He's now a quadriplegic, and he discovered it took him 2 months to even understand what information was needed from him and his doctor to arrange to actually fly Air Canada. So so that's sort of a discovery process that his is an extreme case, but that's part of this as well, is to if the reason for using agents is they get to know you and can ensure that you're getting the services you need and that you want, the personal profile is going to be critical for that. So at some point, this has become really critical mass, but right now we're just figuring out the plumbing of agents talking to agents at all, right? So we're a little ahead of the game, not based on the technology required to do this. The technology is fairly trivial. It's more the organization of it for AI agents to actually do it. And as I said, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, could I create my own profile or hand it over to any one of my wife or my kids who are not technical, I would have said, sure. How hard can it be? And the reality is, it's pretty in depth, and there's a lot of tough questions you need to be able to answer that you may not have thought of or know how to gather the information about yourself. For example, allergies, right? It's not the allergy you know about that's going to kill you. It's the one you didn't know about, right? So a part of that question would suggest that, getting an allergy test before, if you've got any sort of indication from your own personal history that there's certain foods that you react fairly violently to, then you probably want to go and get yourself tested, because there's usually a lot of cross correlation between foods in a certain category, or even across categories, that if you've got an allergy to X, probably got an allergy for Y. So, that's a sort of personal discovery information that some people won't know how to pull together. Similar for somebody going on a ski vacation for the first time. They've skied in their backyard or in a local hill, say here in Ottawa. Now they want to go to somewhere that's, 5,000 feet, and they've never skied at 5,000 feet. Well, that's something that it may be you may or may not be able to cope with altitude, because there's what's the term I'm trying to think of here. There's an altitude sickness that you get, and in most cases you can't test for it. The only way you discover you have it is to actually go to a fairly high altitude, and you need to be very careful in the first couple of days of that altitude for certain symptoms, because if you ignore those symptoms and you try to go even higher, or you stay at a given altitude for a certain length of time, you may be in serious medical trouble. So some of these things you only discover by doing. And I've known at least 3 people who've discovered that by going to places like Machu Picchu and finding they can't make it over. Like Machu Picchu is not so high, but there's some of the access points that you have to climb over to get to it are actually very high. And if you've never done that before, and you don't know if you're prone to the altitude problems or not, so anyway, it's a complex topic.
Yeah, no, I think, to your point, like when it comes to the agents, like trying to leapfrog at least what we're doing is going to get things, for the travel profile, I think at least could get things messy if it's not, properly addressed. So, for example, like let's say, like we can have some of those protocols, like for example, the DITCOM helping us, better communicate and fetch information when it comes to traveler profiles, or at least, previous, details, pulling previous details about a specific profile. The LLM, a part is quite important. For example, the agent acting on our behalf, at least to, pull some of that data through a DITCOM messaging protocol, for instance. And, whenever, for example, we want to interact or enhance that profile, we can do it through DITCOM. So I think also, looking in terms of the right protocol that will help us, get, up and running quite rapidly. Because, at the end of the day, we'll not be able to address all of the scenarios. So at least, we have a basic profile that we know in all cases could be pulled out automatically. A profile that, for example, covers your most recent, updates when it comes to health conditions or travel requirements. Based on that, we can have an agent on top that can, help us, enhance the profile. For example, like if we have any specific needs, we can interact with that, agent through DITCOM. So I think DITCOM is quite a robust, I think also it's zero knowledge proof as well. So, won't, require full exposure of information. So I think to the extent required, this interaction could happen between, the user and the agent, and more data could be pulled from an LLM. But I think that LLM itself, like who's going to host it? If we're speaking about the hospitality and travel industry, I think one of those big players needs to come into play where, they at least, provide that huge, I would say, large language model based, out of many historical, information about a lot of customers who are willing to, provide their inputs to that LLM. So you'd need some consent as part of that process. Based on that, I think that LLM could help you, fetch better quality of information, whether it's related to dietary needs, those catalogs, especially, Michelin,
Okay,
Michelin
so-
menus and.
well, let's put it this way. So there's, I come from a data analytics background, and depersonalizing information for use in larger studies has always been a major problem. And what I would see are several things. One is you are never going to take your personal profile and provide it wholesale to somebody with the personalized information in it for general analytics for marketing purposes. That sort of like violates everything in terms of data privacy. So generally speaking, what will happen is, you would be depersonalized. You say, okay, you're male, you're this age, you have the following aspects that need consideration, which could be plugged into, marketing models or whatever else to look for what kind of services people need, and also in terms of what their buying habits are. So again, depersonalizing your travel experience. What's your travel history? So there are ways to do that. And more importantly, there's a technique that's been around for some time in the analytics industry is called a federalized query. So you don't go out and pull back all my depersonalized data into a central location with that of, 100,000 other people and analyze it. You push out the queries to each individual traveler, have them run the query against their own information, and all you're providing is depersonalized results, which is a lot more flexible. It minimizes the personal data because you're just reporting the results of the question, which can be automatically depersonalized. There's lots of mechanisms to do that. So that way, you can, and you can selectively pick, saying, okay, I'll be willing to share my depersonalized data for, a free ticket to Paris or something. So you could certainly do that kind of thing. So there's lots of techniques to do that. But the protocol that's most of concern here is the request against the schema itself, right? So I want to know how to ask the right questions, and the schema needs to be properly structured so that if you're going to come in with standard like JSON query languages, that in fact you've structured it so that the kinds of queries you want to execute against that actually find the information they want. And if you don't structure that schema correct, it says, you may get no result, you may get a partial result, you may miss certain key information because the query language, you've built the structure so the query language doesn't mesh and it misses, certain information or basically fails because it was structured incorrectly. So that's a big concern, which is why we're making this a fairly simple JSON structure without any. There will be some additional things like cross-linking foods to allergies, but again, one of the things I'm being very careful to do is to ask, when I'm working with ChatGPT, to say, give me how I should build this stuff so that it's compatible with the JSON query language, right? So that's part of the exercise to make sure that it's going to work. That it doesn't preclude doing the things you want to do with it. So there's a lot of subtleties in here that are not the structure itself, but the structure with what you want to do with it. So yeah, anyway, we're at the top of the hour. So thanks for the discussion. And hopefully, like I said, there was no session today for the business aspect of hospitality and travel, but as I said, Kabir Mag has agreed to do a presentation on Friday on the smaller subset that he's actually built into a product. So hopefully see you then.
Excellent. See you, Neil. And I'll be proceeding with the rest of the process maps for the HAT Pro. So there was some documentation around the procedures. So I think with clarity we had today during this discussion about the schema approval and distribution, I'll be also updating that process and hopefully having a slot for it like next Tuesday or something. So we can.
Well,
I think.
what would be useful would be to get your understanding of what are all the pieces we need in terms of, put the code aside for a minute. What is the supporting information that somebody coming in cold to this needs to understand from a business standpoint? Like why do I want to have a service profile? Why do I want to use a personal profile? What can I expect it to give me? Et cetera, et cetera. So, an introduction to here's the concepts, because like I said, I'm hearing from the AI, the diff AI agent discussions, that people are thinking along the same lines in many respects in terms of, how does an agent deal with your data talking to some other agent? They're a broker, right? And that, there's a question and response coming back and forth, in which case it may be deferred through with human verification. It's going to be a mix of a profile and credentials of different, let's call them strengths. A doctor's note is not the same as a passport. But if it's a signed thing, then you can say, yes, I can follow the trace from the doctor back to their medical record. So it's a mix of the use of the profile will also include other parts of a digital wallet and credentials. So that much is, part of that needs to be explained, right? And I think we've done some of that in the guide so far, but it's going to need to get a lot more detailed in the very near future.
Yeah, and I think, for the processes and the documentation, this was more related about the basic, process maps where, we are inducting a newcomer to the schema, what they would need in terms of, tutorials or at least initial information. As you mentioned, some of them might be relevant. For example, what is a user profile? What needs to be there, and what kind of additional considerations, or at least what kind of additional requirements they can expect from those profiles. Then basically getting them involved deeper when it comes to the schema development. So we have also a process for participating in the schema development, as well as the business side of things, like how they can participate in terms of the commercial aspects. Then if we have, for example, like any schema produced, how can we approve and distribute that? So I think it was fairly straightforward and built around the documentation we had for calling for
Mhm.
developers, community call. So and also the like for
Okay.
calling for developers and for business.
Sorry to interrupt. I've got to take someone to a medical appointment in 20 minutes. So,
Yeah, sure. No worries. Sure. Yeah.
all right.
So we'll catch
Talk
up. Thank you. Thanks. Bye bye.